Welcome, everybody. Thank you. In London. I'm sure I actually heard from folks who had seen it. He is about the busiest playwright you've ever met, and is busier now than ever. He's won the Edgar Award for Best Mystery of the Year, 2 Helen Hayes Awards, the Charles MacArthur Award, the Edwin Forrest Award for Services to American Theater. His stage version of Murder on the Orient Express was written expressly at the request of the Agatha Christie estate, has been performed in over 750 productions, and is about to go tour in China. And this is the crazy thing, 1 tour in Mandarin and 1 tour in English. How amazing. In his latest book entitled How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare was named Best Shakespeare Book of the Year. He is a huge proponent of Washington area theater. He served for 10 years on the board of the Folger Theater downtown. Please join me in welcoming Ken Ludwig to the stage. That's for you.
Thank you.
Yes. So wonderful. Thank you. We'll talk for, he and I are going to talk for a little bit, and then we will open it up for questions before we end this just around 6 o'clock. So, Hometown Playwright. How is it different doing a play here or at Arena like with Dear Jack, Dear Louise, or anywhere in town versus, you know, all the craziness of Broadway or the West End?
Well, I get to be around my friends all the time. I've lived here for many years, ever since graduate school. I've lived in DC. I love it here. People say, why do I live here when all my work is in New York and London? And that's true. But it's easy to fly there or train there or whatever. And I love it here. I just think the community is filled with great art. It's filled with great people, you know, really the kind of people I grew up with. I grew up in York, Pennsylvania, little Amish country north of here. And so I'm very comfortable here, so I can sit and write, which is all I do. I'm tremendously boring. All I do is sit sure. I sit in a room and write. There are friends of mine here will attest to that. It's different because I have real friends over the years who were generously come and see the show. I just saw John Muffin, where are you? There you are, all the way back. As I walked out there a second ago, and it's makes me feel great. It makes me feel that I'm really connecting. You know, when I do things around the country and around the world, it's great. I see the audience, they react, but here it's important to be with friends. I just love it.
That echoes. I was fortunate enough to have go see Brandon Jacobs Appropriate on Broadway. Fortunate enough to go out with him afterwards. This was his first show on Broadway. And he said almost the same thing, like, how bizarre that there's nobody I know in this audience, whereas everything else I've done is like, oh, sure, I know you, I can chat with you, but right, yeah. So there are folks here who don't know you that well, so let's start with the fact that you started as a lawyer. How did you go from lawyering to this, to Murder on the Orient Express?
I hate it when people say I was a lawyer. Not because lawyering isn't a great profession. What happened was this. I was a kid in high school and I went to college. And at the end of college, I said to my parents, and they knew this, I want to go in the theater. I'm going to go to New York and do what I have to do to be in the theater. I want to be a playwright. I was influenced. I listened. My parents, it was their fault. They gave me a copy of Richard Burton's Hamlet for my 10th birthday on LPs. And I listened to it thousands of times. So I wanted to be in the theater. And they said, well, that's fine, but what are you really going to do in life? And I said, you know, how are you going to earn a living?
That's familiar.
Fair enough. I get it. And maybe it wasn't such a bad idea. And I'll tell you why I think it ended up being a good idea for me. So I applied to one place, and I thought, good, because I will get in. And it was Harvard Law School, and the son of a bitches let me in. So I went to Harvard Law School. Then I got a scholarship to study in Cambridge, at Cambridge for a couple of years. They came back, finished. My parents thought I wasn't going to finish Harvard Law School, and they were like sitting Shiva. No, it's the end. But I did go back and finish that. And here's the deal: I had no money. So, you know, I had to earn a living. It's the old story. If you go to New York and you want to be a playwright, you wait tables. And so this was my day. Being at a law firm, it's a very good law firm here in DC, Steptoe & Johnson, was my day job because I had to earn a living. So I got into a routine where every morning I would get up at 4 a.m., I mean religiously, write, take my shower, get in my jeans, and write from 4:30 to 8:30, and then put on my suit and walk to work. Because you got to, when you're young, you have the energy, and all I wanted to do was be a playwright. So I did do that, but then sometimes in the press, when I had my first successes, you know, they'd say lawyer turned playwright, as if I didn't take playwriting seriously. Oh man, I fell into playwriting. You know, it was my life, and so I hated that. And then I was in the law firm and writing, and had a couple shows. You know, here they were all in DC because I'm, you know, live here on Church Street. There were a lot of playwrights on Church Street around 14th, and there was the New Playwrights Theater and all those. Harry Bagdasian ran one of them. You may know, remember his name. And so I had a couple plays, and you'd put them on in church basements. So my first play was done in a church basement with about 30 seats, 30 folding seats. And the next play was another church basement with about 40 folding seats. And it was like a triumph. I did it. I got more people. This is going to grow. And then, this is more than you asked for.
Please wind him up and let him talk. I'm fine.
I'll stop. You want me to stop?
Oh, no. Oh, no, look at them. They love it.
All right. So what happened was I wanted to be in the theater, and I did these little small theaters or church basements. And as I was writing, you know, you meet people in a party. I was at a party, and I met a director who had worked in London. He's an Englishman named David Gilmore. And he said, I heard you're a playwright. What have you written lately? And my latest play was Lend Me a Tenor. I'd written it in my little basement. And he said, can I see a copy? So I sent it to him. He went back to England. And he calls me from England, and he says, I really like this play. I'd like to direct it, and I'd like to show it to a producer friend of mine. And being a complete jackass, I said, well, you know, I have friends who are producers too. What's your friend's name? And he said, Andrew Lloyd Webber. Honest to God. And I said, okay. Show it to him. And 10 days later, not even 2 weeks, 10 days later, the phone rings in my little tiny apartment. And the fellow says, how do you do? My name's Andrew Lloyd Webber. You don't know me. Well, I know who you are. And he said, I love your play, and I want to put it on in the West End. I have the rights to fill a theater every so often. A play called Daisy Pulls It Off was there at the time. It was called the Globe. It was on Shaftesbury Avenue. It's now the Yogood on Shaftesbury Avenue. And he said, I have the right to fill it in 6 months. I have to put a play up there in 6 months. Do we have a deal? And I said, we sure do. So he flew me over to London, and it opened in London with stars, and it got all these Olivier Awards, and I was off and running. So and then when I had my second show on Broadway, which was crazy for you. So I skipped a step. So Andrew put it on in the West End, and then he produced it on Broadway, where we played at the Royale, I think I'm right. And we were hit here and got Tonys and this and that. And then I was able to say, and then I still wasn't bold enough. So everybody says, well, you're going to leave the law, you're going to leave the law. I said, well, maybe I'll go part-time. You never know what's going to happen in this business. So I went part-time. And then Crazy for You opened on Broadway, and I had 2 hits on Broadway, and that's the point at which I said, I'd like to not take a leave of absence and leave the law firm. That's like 3 or 4 years later.
It's fantastic. Yeah, and lucky for us. Amazing.
Thank you.
So I found out something, since you brought up Lend Me a Tenor. I found something out. I thought that I was a unique individual in this, but I have learned since that it's not true. Those of you that have seen Lend Me a Tenor know that there are some fabulous spit takes involving a grape. And when I saw Lend Me a Tenor on Broadway at the tender age of less than I am now, I was sitting in the front row, sort of where Connie and Susan were, and Philip Bosco spit a grape right into my lap, which I kept for the very longest time. It was a raisin and all that. But I just learned the other day, I'm not the only person who has brought a raisin to you.
That is not a raisin. Great.
Great. It becomes a raisin.
Yes, you're not. I was at meetings in New York with the Baker Street Irregulars, the great Sherlock Holmes group, and at the cocktail party, a woman came up to me, and she had in a little baggie, and she said, I have a present for you. I said, what's that? And she said, this is the grape that Phil Bosco spit into the audience the night I saw Lend Me a Tenor. So I have it in my drawer, getting dirtier and more unhealthy, but I have it.
Let's talk about comedy, and let's talk about why comedy is so. Tell me why comedy is so hard. Why is this kind of comedy so hard? And like Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm has just come back on for its final season, and there are all these articles about Larry David talks about what makes great comedy, or this person talks about. Making great comedy is really, really hard. Not just writing, but I'm speaking of performing it. Why do you think it's so difficult?
Well, I'll tell you, I can't tell you from the writing standpoint, it's just what I do. And people have a bent and they like doing it. It's what I write. So it's in my heart. What's in my heart is writing things that are optimistic and that make us feel better than ourselves. That's what I write. That's what I do. Performing is a different thing. Performing is hard because people hear it's a comedy, and they go, and a lot of actors and some directors will go, oh, therefore it's going to be funny, so we're going to make it funny, and we're going to go out there and be funny. And you don't. If it's a good comedy, it's a good play. Period. It's just whether it's a good play. And that means all the emotions are real. Everything's earnest. And if you don't care about that couple who want to get married, if you don't care about that crazy mother-in-law who wants to separate them, if you don't think that they're talking from their hearts and that the stakes are high, just as high as they are in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, just as high as they are in anything else. So what you can't do, and what I say to if I see a group of actors who are going sort of in the wrong direction, I say, the thing you can't do, I don't use the word mugging because it's insulting, sort of an insulting word, but don't express it, just deliver the lines. What I always tell actors is, pick up your cues and say the words. Pick up your cues and say the words. Say them from your heart, but don't try to tell us you're funny, and don't try to tell us you're being funny, and don't overreact. Just tell the story in a real, genuine way, because if the play is good, it'll work. And if it's a comedy and the author has done his or her work, the lines will land. I'm going to presume that a lot of folks know what you mean when you say pick up your cues, but can you explain that? Yeah, a cue is when you're in the theater, it's the line that as it ends, and you have to pick up your line. So if what could be an example, even from this play. Max, open the door. Coming, sir. So one person says, Max, open the door. And Saunders says, coming, sir. Well, the coming, sir. The cue is the word door, and the phrase is Max, open the door. And picking up your cues is don't leave space before you say coming, sir. Unless it's earned, unless the director is, unless in that moment they have to run across the room, unless that person has to, fix themselves up to open the door because it's a big moment for them. But normally, and the worst thing that actors can do is put an ellipsis in a line. You're in a line, and the line is supposed to be, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, that canst not then be false to any man. And you get somebody who doesn't act, and Plinius is saying, to thine own self be true. You don't want those 3 dots after the word self. We don't want to hear him emote. We want to hear him say the line. And it's really, especially true in comedy. You've just got to drive through the lines. Pick up your cue and say the words.
Can you think of an example when you've given that, some kind of advice to an actor and you've seen it really transform their performance?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, hugely. And good actors want to hear from the playwright as well as the director. They go, how's it doing? What's wrong? Why isn't this scene landing? And good actors just are hungry for it. And the thing is, playwrights always want to give line readings. Shaw always started off his new plays with everybody sitting in the room and him reading his play to the actors. And it makes all the sense in the world because they want to, in a sense, hear what it means to him. They can go then play jazz on it and make it slightly different, do interesting different things. But you have, knowing the author's intention is important. Nobody does that anymore, which is a shame, I must say. I think, especially with comedies, it would be a really good idea to have the playwright in and to read the play first. But whether they do or not, good actors want, so I'll go, it's considered now bad form to give line readings, especially directors don't do it. They're in terror of doing it. Because
by which he means line readings are, if you say the line, to thine own self be true, and the person is saying, to thine own self be true. And I want it to sound like, to thine own self be true. So I say to the actor, say it like I just said it. That's a line reading.
And
actors go berserk. You can't do that.
Well, nowadays, in the old days they didn't, because now they go berserk about everything. But it's great, and good actors want line readings. They can't wait. I say, I hate to give you a line reading after glancing at the director. Hopefully the director will say, just do it. And everybody wants it. And then the actors will say, always, just doing a new show recently. We were in, remember the moment, my wonderful executive director of my company, Ashley Polisek, is sitting in the front row. Wave your hand. One of the great theater people ever, and runs the entire company in my life. There's a moment where they're saying, and I had to look at them, and they were so relieved that I gave them the line reading, and then that section of the play worked. Of course, you just want to get, because a good actor and a good director wants to get it right. We're all out for the same thing. We're all out to make the play work.
It's maybe surprising to learn that the profession of director actually is a very modern invention. There really weren't directors of plays until that you would call the kind of directing like I would do, or Eleanor Holdridge did for this show, until the 19-teens, 1920s, really into the modern era. Before that, I mean, as we all know, Shakespeare came in and he directed his own play, and George Bernard Shaw started, as you were saying.
Right.
So have you ever seen directors make a mash of your play?
Yeah.
What mistakes do they make? I'm not asking you to name the name.
I have to say, having done, I gotta say, a footnote. Jason Loewith may be the best artistic director in America.
Record that.
With all my heart. I've worked in every theater in the United States, virtually, all around the world constantly, and he has transformed this theater into a great institution of Washington and of national stature, and brought in interesting plays and done things most artistic directors don't do what Jason do. So I'm honest with my heart, I just mean that. Kind of say.
How much do I owe you?
No. What did you ask me?
When you've seen directors not do a great job with one of your plays or musicals, what do you think are the reasons why? Where are their missteps?
Well, this is the basics. The basics. Just tell the story. But I rarely see my own plays. I have a kind of, it's not a rule. I don't impose a rule. But after a show opens in its definitive production, it could be Broadway, it could be the West End, it could be this play opened at the Alley Theater in Houston about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. Eleanor directed. I never go back to see my own plays ever. Ever. I never see my plays. I just don't want to feel like I'm living in the past. Just a quirk. So while, so they're out there in the world and maybe they're doing them well. I hope so. And maybe they're not. They certainly do a lot of them. And that means somebody's doing it right. But I don't want to be there to see it done badly. I get upset.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really only had one big success as a writer, which was a musical called Adding Machine, and after it was a big hit off Broadway, I went to see a production of it in Portugal, in Portuguese, which was a mistake. Huge mistake. They did not understand. So,
Yeah, right.
So don't go to China and see it in But actually, now I do want to quickly ask, Crazy for You, you obviously were part of this big revival in the West End just now. Was it different? Did you feel that production was dramatically different from the original?
Not dramatically, because the play, it's a musical, and the musical always worked, but it didn't at first. I mean, at first, when I first wrote it, and we tried it out at the National Theater here in DC, pre-Broadway, and so much didn't work. The second, I put a ballet in the second act, thinking that's the cool thing to do, because they do that in so many movie musicals, and ballet stops the action, just stop the audience dead. So I took the ballet out. So I rewrote the musical dramatically after our rehearsals in New York, finished them, did a full run through New York, and everything worked in the first act and the second act went through the floor. And so I had to rewrite the second act, came here at the National, rewrote that, worked on, get to New York. Then you have the preview period of a commercial show, which is very important when audiences come and see it before the opening night. So it's slightly less expensive, but it's also a time for us to work on it. So I work on shows till they open. At that point, they're what they are. So this show was formed, and there was not much different. When I went to, we were in London for weeks with it, was to just make sure everybody's doing it well. To the extent I can, it's hard talking to directors. I'm not being facetious now. You don't want to step on toes. Director has just as much invested. They're great artists. And if something's not working, in my view, I just sort of gently go out to dinner and say, I think we can. And then sometimes I thought I could write better lines. I rewrote about 10, 12 more lines to really nail some. In musical comedy, of course, scenes are short, and you want to end each one with a really good laugh going into the next number. So it's very important to really get the laughs where you need them in a musical comedy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're talking about giving notes to actors, and we've, again, so lucky in the productions that we've done of your plays since I've been here that you've been available to give us notes.
Yeah.
Which has been so helpful. Who has given you good notes as you were working on a play? Have you ever gotten like, oh my God, that was a magic note for me, or cracked that scene that I didn't have working?
The directors who were really amazing directors who I worked with, who were able to really see the overall and see what wasn't working and tell me, that. I don't care we can sit there. You can't say that line should have gotten a laugh. After the third night, it doesn't get a laugh. Just forget it. If it's a comedy, you need the laugh there. And the people who told me that on Broadway was Jerry Zaks, who directed Lend Me a Tenor, a great American director. Mike Ockran, who directed Crazy for You. All the great directors I've worked with, we sit down and we talk one-to-one, and they tell me the truth. And so if a scene needs to be tightened, I don't need those lines. So now since being with all these great directors over the years, I can really take it. I'm working on a play right now, and I write the first draft. I just finished the first draft of the first act of a big play. And take a couple days off, go back and say, I don't need that half page in there. Right now, I need to tell that story and move it along. So I'm better now than I ever was at being able to edit myself.
Yeah. Can we talk about that project? Or it's okay if not.
Can I talk about the project?
No, it's no.
Well,
but yes, no. I'm back to comedy anyway.
All right.
So you wrote. If you're interested in, if this intrigues you, this conversation intrigues you, I really invite you to visit Ken's website, which is a treasure trove not only of news about upcoming work, the project I'm not allowed to talk about, and all the projects that have gone before. What?
But that's not on there, is it?
When you can,
When I
you
can.
will know. If you visit the website, you will be the first to know.
Right.
Or second. No, but seriously, on that, also I think is a great essay that you wrote, I don't know how long ago, called On Comedy.
Uh-huh.
You talk about the great tradition, which
Right.
is the tradition of comedy in which you write. And,
Right.
you trace it back to Midsummer's probably the greatest comedy ever written, Midsummer Night's Dream, I'm speaking of. The sort of 5 or 6 points in the great tradition that you elucidate, which include things like these are plays that are innately romantic, they are optimistic, they transport their characters outside their normal world, and so on. Do you think, over the course of your career, and here we are in 2024, that some of the points about the great tradition are changing? Do you think they remain the same? Like, is mistaken identity still a great basis for comedy? Are parents disapproving of children's romantic interests? Do you think that's changing?
Well, that's a great question. That's a great question. I think that a lot of them remain the same. So when I talk about the great tradition of English, comedy in the English language, because I can't speak authoritatively about French or Spanish, the Spanish don't have any writers. Yeah, it is, but the French have Moliere. It is. I'm talking about. I didn't mean they didn't have any writers 300 years ago writing comedy. There are certain tropes, what I call tropes, certain basic situations that you see addressed in comedies throughout the century that I think do still remain viable. For example, one you just alluded to, the older generation standing in the way of the sexual urge of the younger generation, which is, when the play opens, no, you may not marry, the guy saying to his daughter, you may not marry that boy. That's such a basic human instinct, and it is so innately comic, because it goes all the way back to the Greeks, and
but also innately tragic. Romeo and Juliet
can be innately tragic, and that's why it's so great as a comic engine. Because all great comic engines should be able to go either way. So I don't know that mistaken identity is none of these things are necessary to write good comic plays. And look at the whole sets of new worlds of comic plays that are now being done and lauded, and rightly so, that are not traditional in that sense. But you'll be surprised how many of them do have underneath them a lot of these because these are basic human emotions. Boys and girls arguing, young lovers arguing over jealousy. These are innate, and that's what comedy is made up of. These people from the country going to the city, people from the city going to the country. That's as you like it, but it's also half the sitcoms on television. Being displaced and going to a new place.
Beverly Hillbillies.
Yeah, exactly right. So we see them, and I think they're still basic. I think people are adding new spins and new identities and new energies to them, but I think you can't leave them behind.
When you look around right now, whether it's on stage or in film, television, streaming, whatever, what are the kinds of comedies that you've seen, if you're aware of them, that you feel are exciting today?
Saying which ones that are on now?
Yeah, and again, some recent, whether it's, you mentioned great plays, great comic plays being done around now. Who's writing great comedies today, whether it's for the stage or film or television?
Well, if you add for film or television, of course, there's such a wealth of great comedy on television, and I don't know the writers' names, and I don't always know the writers' names in film either. The genius of the 20th century in film was Woody Allen. I mean, he just was a great comic playwright. Nobody wrote like him, and saw the whole picture and could write a play. Something like Mighty Aphrodite or Broadway Danny Rose. Broadway Danny Rose, I think, is just a masterpiece. And because it makes you laugh and laugh and laugh. At the end, you're just in tears. You just can't help it. Tom Stoppard's written a couple of great plays. I particularly love his play On the Razzle. A lot of people don't know it because it takes a big cast. It was done at Arena Stage right after Zelda left. Doug Wager took over, and Doug did a production at Arena Stage of On the Razzle that was dazzlingly good. And there you go. It's based on an old English play that became a play in France, and it's the basic story is what I'd say. I'll call it this: two country mice going to the big city for a day of pleasure. So it's the story of Hello Dolly, if you know Hello Dolly. It's a shop in Yonkers, New York, or in a small town, and the two clerks, have stars in their eyes. They've never been out of Yonkers. And when the boss goes away to be in a parade in New York City, they sneak away from the place they work, this little dry goods store, all their lives, and they go to the big city for a day of adventure. Well, the idea, that's what I was talking, is one of the tropes. Going from a small town to a big town where you have adventures you never dreamed of. And conversely, going from a big town into the country, as you like it, hundreds of things. I mean, Parks and Rec. It is, when you go to the countryside, learning truths about yourself and about society that you didn't see in the big city, because the country teaches you kindness and perspective, and those are just forever stories.
In Lend Me a Tenor and Lend Me a Soprano, is the world of opera, if kind of what that forest of Arden in a way?
Absolutely. I've sort of a forest of Arden in a lot of my plays, which is, wanting to do something with all your heart. In this story, you'll see, if those who don't know, it's Lend Me a Tenor on its head, and it's rewritten virtually totally, but it's the same story, is that a young person who just has in his heart that he, in this case she, could be a great opera singer, has studied opera, and works at the Cleveland Grand Opera Company, and sees, and a great one of the greats of the world is coming in, and feels in her heart, in this case, I could do that. If anybody could just let me show what I can do, because that's inside me. People don't see it, but it's inside me. I have greatness inside me. And then you set it in the world of opera, which is a playground. It's great costumes, it's a different world, it's people with large egos, and that's what going into the city or the country is. You go into a great new society that's larger than life.
Let's shift to something you're doing now with Murder on the Orient Express in the Agatha Christie estate, which clearly loves you, and I'm sure would love for you to do more adaptations. How is working on adapting an Agatha Christie novel, how is it similar to the work that you've done in, whether it's Lend Me a Tenor or Lend Me a Soprano, whatever, your other plays? You talk about yourself as a craft, like a wheelwright or a boatwright.
Right.
Is it a similar kind of craft that you practice when you look to, I mean, obviously Lend Me a Tenor and thus Lend Me a Soprano sprang completely whole from your own head.
Right.
When you're adapting something that's sprung from somebody else's head.
Different? More so. What you just said is, when you have a novel as the basis, and the Christie estate calls me, which was great. I was so privileged, and they said, would you do a stage adaptation of this novel? It's never been done. there, all those wheelwright boat, craftsmanship issues come to the fore. You look at the novels, Long has lots of extraneous characters, extraneous to the main plot. And you have to find the through line, and you have to be ruthless about staying to the through line and keeping it ticking over, because mysteries you want to keep ticking over. And when do you meet Poirot, and when do we see he's so smart, and when does the murder happen on stage? You don't say, oh, it happens in the novel, 30% of the way into the novel, therefore it has to be 30% into the way of the play. Just the opposite. If anything, what I've done is made sure that it happens later, so we're all on the edge of our seat. We know in a murder mystery, especially a Christie one, somebody's going to die, and you're on the edge of your seat. So it's all craftsmanship.
And timing. I mean, when we were walking over here, you'll see tonight the play starts with a moment of a character listening to this great Elena Ferenzi, the opera star. How long that goes on is very important.
Well, yes.
The engine of the play
engine has to
requires
start.
certain.
That's right. You can't be listening to that and you see that the person on stage really loves it and is affected by the opera and is in fact in love with Elena Ferenzi, this great star, the Taylor Swift of the opera world. But you got to learn that quickly. You got to learn that in the first 10 seconds and move on. So you don't want to see somebody emoting for 25 seconds. That's an eternity in the theater. So that's a directing issue. And then when we give notes, we have to decide, get the play moving. Always try in a comedy, always try to get a laugh as soon as you can, because you got to let the audience relax and know what that they're allowed to laugh. And so you need to try to get a laugh as soon as you can in a comedy. Neil Simon, the great Neil Simon, told me 3 things about comedy. He said, you have to have a ceiling, as this does. It's black in there, but that's the ceiling. You see there, because a comedy, if it's going to be the kind of a combustible comedy, it has to feel like it can blow out of that set. They have to feel like they're tightly knit into a particular place. That's why so many comedies are often one set. He also told me that always, I write longhand, and so did he. And he said, always use a long yellow pad with thin lines, because then you can get lots more on that one page. And his third piece of advice was always make sure that the actors' faces are lit up. The lighting is good by the lighting designer, because if you can't see the face, you're not going to get the laugh.
Faster, louder, funnier, brighter. That's what we say.
Is
it true? Am I crazy that somebody said comedy plus time equals tragedy, or tragedy less time equals comedy?
I've heard that, and I don't remember either. But it's.
But this was what I was going to say. The other thing, this is something in terms of tropes, and boy, do you rely on it in a beautiful way. A ticking clock. The great importance of a ticking clock to
absolutely to all theater, to Long Day's Journey into Night, to anything. You have to know
a slowly ticking clock.
Which our maestro here is going to go see in London soon.
Yeah, who's coming to London with me? We're all going to see Long Day's Journey with Brian Cox in Succession.
Pretty great. You have to have an end. You have to know what people want. It's that thing about wanting something. And that's where the play is going. So it gives you for propulsion, and it gives you a goal, and you know where you're going. It's very important.
So you've given us Neil Simon's the dear departed Neil Simon's advice for comedy writing. For those aspiring comedy writers in the audience or in the virtual audience, before we open it up for questions, anything that you would say to them? Any lawyers looking for something else to do? Plenty of lawyers.
Yes, I do, because I just thought of it the other day, and it's this. I'm very close to my brother. He is in town. We've never lived further than 3 blocks away from each other. He's my older brother. We've been best friends since the day I was born. And when I would go to the law firm during that period when I worked in the morning so long, and he actually was a lawyer in town too, and we'd walk into town together, and I'd be going, God, I'm writing this play about such and such, and nobody's going to ever come see it. I should just give this up. I just give this up. And his advice to me every time was, keep your head down and just keep writing. Just don't ask. Just keep your head down and keep writing. It's the best advice ever.
It's good advice. I'm going to thank Josh Ford, who I'm not even sure if he's here. Oh, he is here. I thought maybe you were watching on streaming. Josh just texted me. It's tragedy plus time equals comedy. Woody Allen, Hannah and her sisters. Thank you, Josh.
Tragedy plus time equals comedy. Oh, that's very good.
Yeah. Great. As we approach the end of our time together, before we break and come back to see the show, I'm happy to open it up for questions to anybody. I'm also happy to keep talking to Ken because it's delightful, but I want to give other folks a chance. So any questions? I think that's Al. And I'll repeat for everybody.
We're very lucky that you were available and came on board.
Thank you.
Jason had to twist your arm, but we're very lucky.
He didn't have to twist my arm. I'm a huge fan of Jason, as you heard, but truly am, and huge fan of the Olney. I've been going to the Olney for years and years. I grew up in York, Pennsylvania.
So here's my question. You were saying how important it is for actors to hear a reading of the play from the playwright.
Yeah.
So why don't you record your reading of it so that every time they put you your play, they can hear it?
The question, I think, is why not record a reading of your play so that actors can refer to it?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Do I owe you anything?
Ashley's taking a note.
Good show.
Yeah. It's a good idea. I don't know how many people would actually listen to it, but I can say, because I write blogs and that's all over the place, that's what you should do if you're starting to play. Then you know what the author's intentions are. Then if you don't do it anyway, you say, hey, I don't like doing that way, but you know what the author's intentions are. Great idea. Wow.
He'll send you the royalties.
You know what? No, we won't.
Comedy. Speaking of, you just mentioned, I just want to quickly say, your long history with Olney. You've never revealed to me, but I am going to say, but I'm going to ask you one more time. You spent your honeymoon here. What show did you see?
Now that you say it, it was an Agatha Christie mystery. I forgot that. That's correct. She lives around.
Awesome. Full circle. Other questions, from anyone? Yes.
Hi, thank you for giving us part of your afternoon. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
When you are invited to adapt a work that is already written, is there any expectation on the part of those who are asking for the adaptation that you tweak it in a Ken Ludwig way that somehow becomes comedic? Or is there an understanding that you're going to be true to whatever the tone is of the original work?
Well, I don't think there's ever a feeling that I'm necessarily be true. They know what they're getting. They've seen my shows, and I never agreed to, that their approval has it. Once they sign up, I get to do it. I get to do it all over the world, and that's that. Because otherwise, it'd be a waste of my time. I can't get them looking over my shoulder. Everyone's always been very nice about it, and know, if I Murder on the Orient Express ended up with lots of huge laughs, but it kept the tension up. So it worked out well. And that's because comedies and mysteries are essentially the same genre. A great critic, literary critic, Northrop Frye, writes about this in one of his books. He wrote Anatomy of Criticism, the most famous book of about English language criticism ever, the last 100 years. But he also wrote one called A Natural Perspective, the Development of Shakespearean Comedy and Romance. And he says this in that book. And he says, if people talk about genres, well, I don't like the word genres, but, to the extent people say that mystery is a genre, well, what it's like is comedy, because there's a lot. Think of it this way. If you take jigsaw puzzle pieces and you throw them up in the air, you can't tell where they're going and what's going to happen. But ultimately, if they come down and they all lock together, that's what you want at the end of a mystery. We're talking about traditional mysteries. but 99% of the mystery's written since, we've been around. And that's what you want in a comedy. And you want it to lock together and have work, and you figure out why people, and end happily. You want a happy ending. What is the definition of a comedy in drama? What is the definition? It's a happy ending. Yes, it can be iffy. Yes, you don't know where people are going. Now, to the extent that, it's not, and it's eerie and it's worrisome. Sure, people might call them comedies, and that's what you talked about. Do the comic tropes still hold for us? Well, they do in classical comedy, where there are happy endings. In other pieces that are troubling, at the end, I don't know if you'd call them comedy. They make you laugh a lot along the way. I'm making a big distinction between two things, which is a comedy is a kind of drama that has a specific structure, and it has to work like that. And it's got three parts. It's like a sonata in music. It's got the statement of the themes. It's got the development, and it's got the restatement of the themes in a different key. That's how a sonata works. How plays have to work. Plays have to work that way. And comedies and mysteries do the same thing in that sense. They've got to lock together at the end.
It's just really interesting the way you say that, and I agree. You know very well when you've seen a comedy that doesn't work. You know really well when you've seen a mystery that doesn't grab you the way it should. And I feel like dramas are a lot more on a much larger spectrum of, well, it was great, or it was maybe, or I don't know. But
yes.
You know when a comedy doesn't work.
You know when it doesn't work. Alas.
I saw a hand over this way, maybe? Yes.
I'm curious about your formal education. How much your pre-college, college, and law school experiences educated you or influenced you to do what you're doing now?
What in your education, in your formal education, helped prepare you, lead you to this writing career of yours? This is your life, Ken Ludwig.
Yeah, this is my life. Please come out, Professor Sargent, who taught me Shakespeare.
The professor who taught you Shakespeare.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I learned tons about Shakespeare. Look, I knew Shakespeare kind of as much as you could as a high school person inside and out. It was kind of my life. It's what I lived for. And then you go to college, you get a good professor who has a big influence on you. Big, yes, very influential. Then went to law school, where people want to say, oh, writing, oh, you have to write a law as a lawyer. Well, nothing to do with each other. Absolutely nothing to do with each other. Writing and law is completely different.
Sorry, Jay.
So it's a great, being a great writer in law is important, or being a good writer at least, but they have nothing to do with each other. So, who the hell would go into the theater? I mean, you have to be crazy. Most people can't make a living at it. You starve, you do this, you hope for an audience, and then a play goes on, you get one hit, and then the next one isn't. You have critics coming in imagine, everything you do professionally. Okay, now we're going to come in and say whether you did that well or not. That was a good brief. No, that wasn't a good brief. It's a hard life, and you go into it if it's in your heart. It's just so got to be, because you'd be crazy to go into it otherwise. So no.
We have time for a couple more questions, if there are, if anybody. I can't quite see. Oh, thank you.
So a lot of your comedies have been translated into other languages, and they've been performed all around the world. Does the comedy always translate into other cultures and other countries, where something we might find funny somewhere, someone in China, or some other, they might not find it funny?
Great question. Sorry, repeat it.
Great question about how your work translates into other cultures, not only other languages, and does the comedy work similarly or differently?
Well, I had a good, interesting experience when Lenny and Tenor was first done in London and Broadway. Everybody came to license it from all over the world. There were dozens and dozens of licenses around the world, and all 5 Scandinavian countries licensed it to put it on, and each one has a different language. So it was a huge hit in Sweden. It was a huge hit Iceland, we were in at the National Theater of Iceland in rep for 5 years, in rep with other things. It was a huge hit in Denmark. It fell on its face. The Danes didn't find this funny. And now, what were the reasons? Well, maybe they just don't have a sense of humor. That's a problem. The second possibility is that the translations weren't very good, because everybody translates in their own language. And as the playwright, just by nature, it's not because me, any playwright who has this done, you have an agent, the agent makes deals, and you always have a right to look at the translation and make your comments. But the trouble is, it's of course an empty offer. I don't speak any of those languages. I never will in any level of proficiency, so I don't know what the hell they're doing. And I can tell you one truth, is the translator in Denmark was a bunch of crap. Just didn't know how to translate.
I do love that Murder on the Orient Express, your version of Murder on the Orient Express is such a huge hit in China. There was a very interesting article not long ago in the New York Times about how the film market in China, which for a long time was really flooded with Hollywood titles, is now far less popular. But who knows? So
I don't know.
I don't know
what
the
they're
answer.
doing.
We probably have time for one more, if there is one more, if anybody wishes. Yes, sir.
I have a question, a bit confused. I thought one of the first plays that the Gershwin Brothers did was called Girl Crazy.
No.
Yeah, not Girl Crazy, Crazy for You.
No, wait.
Oh, sorry.
No, he's right.
Yep.
The question was, he thought that one of the first plays done by the Gershwin Brothers was Girl Crazy. Yes, and here's the story. When the person a guy named Roger Horshaw, a man who started the Horshaw catalog, made a lot of money, acquired the rights of the Gershwin songs done by the two brothers together, which is about 400. Each wrote with other people too. With the 400 they wrote together, he acquired the rights to, meaning not lifetime rights, not worldwide rights, the right to put a musical on with those songs. He acquires those for a certain amount of money, and he calls me up out of the blue. I had a show on Ludwig on Broadway, which was only comedy at the time, and he says, I want you to make this into a musical, and I want you to do an adaptation of this, because it's all Gershwin music, of this Gershwin show called Girl Crazy. They had a show on in the 1930s called Girl Crazy. So I got a copy of Girl Crazy. The book was by Guy Bolton, the same guy who worked with P.G. Woodhouse and stuff. I mean, he was a good writer, but it was a terrible book, because in those days, musical comedy books were very episodic. So it was the funny taxi driver from New York who drives them people, and it's the funny, it was set in the Wild West. So I thought the two things, I'll take the notion of an Easterner going west, which was basic to that story, because it gave me the ability to use two of the songs that sort of address that in that musical, Girl Crazy. One of them called Could You Use Me? Your chaps are this thing, and this boots are this thing, or referring to cowboys. And then it was a nice idea, an Easterner going west. And I threw the entire thing out completely and wrote a whole new musical. So it's not an adaptation of Girl Crazy. It's nothing. It was, and I used it had I Got Rhythm in it. Pretty good song. It had Embraceable You in it. Pretty good song. And then I just wrote a whole new musical. But it was based on something called Girl Crazy.
You win the prize.
That's great.
You get, we're going to give you a program.
You're paid for this?
You can autograph it. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. I want to thank Ken as well for his play. Thank you all very much for being